Well, good morning and welcome to today's episode of Transform. Today I want to continue the series I started a few weeks ago on the foxes that try to destroy the fruit while it's on the vine. And today I want to talk to you on the first part of the Fox of Unforgiveness.
Welcome to today's message with Pastor Jim Balzano.
Before I go any further, I want to thank Park Home and I want to thank Made by Vogel for many of the things that you see in our studio. Jesus tells a parable after Peter came and asked him a question. Let me read it to you. So Peter came up and said to him, "Lord, how many times shall my brother sin against me and I still forgive him? Up to 7 times? Jesus says, I say to you, not 7, but 7 times 70. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his slaves. And when he began to settle them, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. But since he did not have the means to repay, his master commanded that he be sold along with his wife and children and all that he had, and repayment be made. So the slave fell to the ground and prostrated himself before him, saying, Have patience with me, and I'll repay you everything. And the master of that slave felt compassion, and he released him, and he forgave the debt. But that slave went out and found one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. And he seized him and he began to choke him, saying, Pay back what you owe. So his fellow slave fell to the ground and he began to plead with him, saying, Have patience with me and I will repay you. But he was unwilling, and he went and he threw him in prison until he would pay back what was owed. Every time I read that passage, it's an amazing thing. One of the amazing things that amazes me as a believer is the ability that we have sometimes to live as a forgiven servant living an unforgiving life. I mean, he goes out from that place forgiven. He goes out from the presence of the king forgiven from his debt. He goes out from the presence of mercy. He goes out from the presence of grace. And the Bible says he looked for this guy who owed him money. And when he found him, he choked him and said, Pay me back what you owe me. And then he puts him in prison. This is a forgiven servant living an unforgiving life. I sometimes wonder how we as believers can profess to be forgiven by God and choose to live an unforgiving life. It doesn't make sense. And yet what we do is like this guy, we put somebody in a prison and then we expect them to pay us what they owe with no opportunity. Man, let me encourage you right off the bat. If you're a believer, if you're a son of God, you're a child of God, you've been forgiven by God, don't live an unforgiving life. It doesn't match up. And so I began to think about this little bit of thing I want to do for the podcast. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do today, what is forgiveness? What is it? Well, I want to say this to you. It's a fruit. You see, I believe forgiveness is a fruit in the life of a believer that flows from forgiveness that was given to us. I believe the forgiveness we receive from God should be the seed that develops into the fruit of forgiveness for others. And so I want to talk about this fruit of forgiveness. First of all, forgiveness is fruit from a forgiven servant. Forgiveness is fruit from a forgiven son. It's the evidence that we have been forgiven. If we've been a forgiven person, if we're a forgiven son, we're a forgiven servant, one of the things that must flow out of us is this ability to forgive others. It is a seed that was planted in there by God's forgiveness. You see, remember Jesus said this? Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. The two flow hand in hand. Forgiveness is fruit that reflects the Father. The Son is always a reflection of the Father. The Father, the Bible tells us, is full of compassion. He's full of mercy. He's full of grace. And yet, sometimes when you and I, as sons of God, choose to walk in a spirit of unforgiveness, we are not representing who our Father is. When you and I choose to walk in a spirit of unforgiveness, we're a poor representation of our King. How do people around us see the character of our Father? How do they see the character of our King? How do they see the nature of Him? Shouldn't they see the nature and character of Him through us? And one of the ways that we do that is when we offer forgiveness that He gave to us. When that servant left the presence of the king, one of the biggest problems I have is he was a poor reflection of the nature of the king he served. Forgiveness is the fruit of humility. You know, who's the greatest? When you choose not to forgive, you've answered that question. I am. I am greater than you, therefore I'm not going to forgive you. You are saying they are not worth your forgiveness. You're walking in a spirit of unforgiveness that sets yourself on the throne and they beneath you. Children hold grudges. Children learn to hold grudges. They don't naturally do it. They learn to hold them. You see, all of a sudden, pride develops in us, and our rights and our attitude. You see, you think about it, it's your pride, your rights, my attitude that sets us above the person who sins against you. Humility has to be a catalyst to forgiveness. Paul said in Colossians, those of you who've been chosen by God, holy and beloved, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another and forgiving each other. It flows from humility. When you can't forgive, it is your pride that's in the way. Forgiveness is a fruit of faith. Make no mistake about it. I believe it's a fruit of faith because the only way I can receive my forgiveness from God is by faith. When I put my faith in what Jesus did at Calvary for me, I am forgiven. It is an act of faith. Peter asked the question, how many times I got to forgive my brother? He says, 7 times 70, Jesus said. The response was, increase our faith. You see, in the natural, I don't want to do it. In my natural ability, I can't do it. This is something I don't want to do from my carnal nature. I don't really want to do it. And yet, it's a spiritual thing. And the spiritual thing demands an act of faith. I can only give by faith that which I have received by faith. You see, forgiveness must be fruit that flows from believers. It is fruit that is grown from the seed of forgiveness planted in us when God forgave us. Forgiveness is fruit that continually produces fruit. Yet the fox of unforgiveness wants to destroy any possibility of ongoing fruit. I'll close with this. Joseph, sold out by his brothers, raw deal, gonna kill him, didn't kill him, sold him as a slave, ends up in Egypt. The brothers come looking for bread. He recognizes them. They don't recognize him. He's second in charge. He could have killed them in a heartbeat, but he chose not to. He chose to forgive rather than not. And you know what happened? The fruit kept growing, and Israel kept growing because some man, a man named Joseph, chose to give the fruit of forgiveness rather than operate in unforgiveness. Listen to me today. That fox of unforgiveness wants to destroy any continual fruit in your life. Don't let him do it. Choose to forgive. God bless you. Have a great week.